Welcome to Fantasy Football Today Dynasty. I am your host, Heath Cummings, and if you're here on YouTube, look who's here with me. It's Jacob Gibbs. He's back. Gibbs, so good to talk to you again.
Yeah, always great to hop on FFT Dynasty. Thanks for having me on. I've been, a little bit unplugged from the online world lately. This is, I think, my first podcast of 2025. So grateful to Heath for dragging me back into it and excited to talk some football.
We are going to make it a great one. It's been a while since I've talked to Jacob Gibbs. It's been a while since we've kind of talked about the news, like all the rumors and things that are going on in the NFL world. We've been focusing on rookies. We've been focusing on mock drafts. We've been focusing on other things. And so I just want to kind of take today's show. We're going to talk about some of the trade candidates. We're going to talk about some of the potential free agents. We're going to talk about Travis Kelce here in just a moment. Just talk about some of the more recent happenings and the impact they have in the dynasty world. And then also I will be at the end of the show unveiling my top 6 rookies. Gibbs said to me before the show, I will talk to you about anything but rookies. Fair. It's still too early, but I've got a top 12 that is out at CBS Fantasy. I'm going to give you the top 6. You got to go click on the article to get 7 through 12. That's the way this thing works, right? Let's start, as we always do, with 3 questions for our guest, Jacob. Travis Kelce is back. If you're a true contender, how many tight ends would you rather have on your dynasty roster?
Yeah, I think it's a good thought exercise because I checked KTC and Keep Trade Cuts value has Travis Kelce all the way down at tight end 23 in terms of, overall perceived value consensus, which was, that's wild. I didn't realize it had dropped that low, especially with the news that he's going to be back. But I think it makes some sense after digging into it and doing this exercise, thinking about your question, the for sure names for a contender were Brock Bowers, Trey McBride, Sam Laporta, George Kittle, T.J. Hawkinson, David Njoku, and Tucker Kraft. And then I got into maybes, and there's a lot, honestly. The guys that I put in as firm, maybes or probablys, I guess, would be Jonnu Smith, Mark Andrews, Jake Ferguson, and Dalton Kincaid. And it's just man, we haven't even mentioned these rookies. If some of these rookies land in good spots, there's some really intriguing rookies. It seems like there's just a lot at the tight end position that I feel much better about long-term. And it wouldn't surprise me if these guys outscored Kelce even next year. I'm really curious to get I've got some statistical stuff to throw at you, but just first, I'm curious to get your take as a guy who watched the Chiefs all the time. I feel like Rashee Rice being put back into this offense is going to mostly negatively impact Kelce, but I could be wrong on that. Maybe it's worthy. How do you think this all settles out?
Well, I think that the key point that we still don't know, that 23, I'm assuming probably isn't that updated with the news of Kelce saying he's coming back. We're still pricing in some risk that he might just retire. We still have some unknowns, though. We don't know, when is Rice going to be 100%? And is he exactly the same guy as he was at the beginning of last year? We don't know how many games Rashee Rice is going to play this year. Is he going to be facing a suspension? If you're telling me it's 17 games with Rice, Kelce, and Worthy, then I think Kelce's probably more of a low-end top 12 tight end in redraft, which probably puts him outside of the top 15 in Dynasty. Right now, I have Kelce at 10th in my Dynasty rankings with the idea that he's definitely playing this year. I probably undervalued him a little bit just thinking about last year for fantasy football purposes, because he did produce basically as a borderline top 5 tight end while scoring 3 touchdowns. Mm-hmm. I think it's really interesting that he scored a point and a half more per game than Laporta and Andrews, and both of those guys scored a lot more touchdowns than Kelce did. And we all think that touchdowns are about the least predictive part of fantasy football. And so I think there's a better bounce back chance for Kelce next year than most people seem to think that there is. But also there's a significant risk. I mean, he's one injury away from having 0 value. Mm-hmm. And if he takes another step back last year, which a lot of times players his age, when they start dropping off, I always say if a guy shows you he's falling off at 30 or 31 or 32, believe him. Well, Kelce's older than any of those numbers. So I do think as a true contender, there's not any of the names that you put ahead of him, except for maybe Tucker Kraft. Just because like I love the exciting stuff we've seen from Tucker Kraft. I have a hard time projecting increased volume for anyone in Matt LaFleur's offense. It seems to be by design that nobody catches more than like 60 passes in that offense. And if he's going to be a 60 catch, 750-yard guy, it's hard to get too excited about a guy like that as a contender. But all the other names I would have, you said Njoku, right? Yeah. So all the other names I would have ahead of him in my regular dynasty rankings. I do have Kincaid ahead of him. If I was a true contender, I don't think I could say that I would rather have Kincaid because I mean, shoot, what's his dynasty value if he starts off the first month of next year, what he's been so far in his career? People are going to stop believing in any hope for him to improve. So there's a lot of risk with Kincaid as well. Let's get to question number 2. And I worded it terribly. And so Jacob didn't understand it. And so I'm not going to word it as terribly when I say it on air. But there's some rumors that Matthew Stafford may not be on the Rams anymore. Maybe a Raider, maybe a Giant. And there's been some talk that Aaron Rodgers could be the quarterback to replace him. I guess, are you worried at all about Puka Nacua, 1, losing Stafford, 2, with the possibility that Rodgers shows up, brings Adams with him, and all of a sudden Puka's only seeing 7 or 8 targets a game?
I think so. It's not a long-term worry for sure. Like Puka is, I think, who we've seen him be, which is just a phenomenal player who can win in all facets of the game and has really improved from year 1 to year 2. And I think it's fair to expect him to continue to improve. But I do think it could be a short-term concern. I do think that playing with Stafford really has helped him. And, we saw Garrett Wilson's targets scale back a little bit with Adams coming to town there. But I just wanted to just kind of provide a frame of reference for people who might be concerned about Puka. And it's just like, it's so insane what we've seen him do through his first 28 games. He's averaged 2.9 yards per route run. And for context on that, through an initial 28 career games, that blows any other receiver out of the water. Like Justin Jefferson, AJ Brown, and Odell Beckham are the only other guys above 2.5. And the highest of that group is Jefferson at 2.68. Puka's is 2.9. It's really, really insane what we've seen him do. And that is though boosted by target volume. So if you look at the other highest players on that list, the highest target per route run rate is 27%. Most of these guys fall in the 23 to 27% range because rookies generally, it takes time for them to establish himself as a dominant target. Puka's target per route run rate through his first 2 seasons is 31%.
Which is elite, not just for a young guy, but for anybody.
For anybody, yeah. He had a 38% target per route run rate last year, which blew any previous high single season number out of the water. The next high is 36%. That was Tyreek Hill 2 years ago. The next highest behind that was Cooper Kupp's big season at 33.4%. Puka's was 38% last year.
Right.
So I bring that point up because, yes, Matthew Stafford influences that for sure. But I do want to contextualize that by saying that it's not like Puka hasn't had target competition. Cooper Kupp, say what you will about his decline, he has been around over the last couple of years. And even with Kupp on the field over the past 2 years, on those specific splits, Puka's target per run rate is still 30.7% compared to 33% with Kupp off of the field. So I think he is who he is. He's really, truly this good talent-wise. And if you're content like betting on that talent, then I don't think you worry at all about the short term. But
it's funny because I saw somebody tweet, and I'm doing this again, not giving people credit for tweets, but if Stafford goes to the Raiders, is Brock Bowers the 101 in FFPC? And my thought actually had been if Stafford goes to the Giants, is Malik Neighbors the number 1 wide receiver in redraft and dynasty? Some things are going to change over the next few months, and we're going to kind of speculate on how those things could change. One more question for Gibbs before we take a break and then ask him some more questions. If Jayden Daniels gets another good wide receiver, is he the consensus QB1 in Dynasty?
I think that his perceived value might move that high. It feels very risky to invest in him at that level. Like I would rather still invest in Josh Allen at that price. So for me, it is Allen just because of sustainability. Right. We've seen it with Allen, and I think it is more sustainable. going forward. What we just saw from Allen this past year with the group of pass catchers that he had is so impressive. And I'm extremely excited about Jayden. I absolutely love everything that we saw from him statistically that backs it up, and then also on the field, it's just obvious. And yeah, adding another receiver would be really, really exciting, but I do worry about the size and the sustainability of him being able to do this year over year.
Let's take a short break. We'll be right back talking about trade candidates and potential free agents. Okay, we are back. I've got a handful of guys who we think could get traded. And the first one we just kind of talked about in Matthew Stafford. How are you viewing him in terms of next year and beyond? He is at that age where a lot of quarterbacks have fallen off, but we've also seen a couple of guys like Tom Brady and Drew Brees, really highly skilled passers, be able to perform well past Stafford's age. But I wonder, like, is it going to matter where he lands, or do you just think he's going to be a low-end QB2 no matter what? Going away from McVay wouldn't matter.
I do think going away from McVay matters. I think he's probably going to be a low-end QB2, but it's going to be really interesting to see how he ages because so much of his game, I do think, is reliant on the arm talent that he has. And if that starts to decline, it will just be interesting to see how that goes. But at the same time, like what the arm talent is really important for Stafford, but what like propels him above into this higher level that I don't even know if people really realize how good he is his ability to do all the other little things, all the ability to manipulate defense. Ben Gretsch, our buddy Ben, just posted a Substack where he was just gushing about Stafford and how great he is and how he impacts receivers because of these little things. And it's throwing with anticipation, it's ball placement, the ability to manipulate defense and like keep his wide receiver one fed week after week, even when the opposing defenses know that the game plan is all about stopping Cooper Kupp or Calvin Johnson. He keeps them fed. And I think that all comes down to the IQ that Stafford has and his ability to make defenses think he's doing things and just control all of the space on the field. So I think there's hope that even if the arm talent did decline, he would still be able to, be a relevant guy for some time. But yeah, for fantasy, I don't think it's going to change too much, but going away from McVay is a big deal. Like that offense is a machine.
I'm going to combine a potential trade cut candidate with a guy who's already there, a free agent, and that is Kirk Cousins and Aaron Rodgers, two guys that I've got pretty significantly less valuable than Stafford in my dynasty quarterback rankings in my trade charts. Do you have any faith in either one of these guys? I kind of think that I almost have more hope that Cousins just wasn't fully recovered last year and can get back to being Cousins, whereas I just feel like Rodgers might be washed.
Yeah, that's basically where I'm at. I don't even know if I would say it's hope. I just love Cousins and would love for that to be the case, but I really don't feel optimistic about it at all. And Rodgers, yeah, I don't know, man. Like I did some research this past offseason on how unprecedented it would be for Rodgers to be relevant at this point in his career. There really are only two guys who have ever done it. It's Brees and Brady. We've seen so many instances of guys dropping off at that age cliff where he's at. And then when you throw in the injury as well, it's just like, is it any surprise at all what we saw last year? Is there any reason to believe that it's going to change? If the Rams and McVay truly do believe in him and choose him, that would be enough for me to, sure, be like a neutral with him. But otherwise, I'm not neutral. I'm kind of assuming it's over.
We got a couple of wide receivers. We knew it was made obvious early in the offseason that Deebo Samuel was a trade candidate. The 49ers were way open to that. Just this week, we also hear that they're listening to calls for Brandon Aiyuk. I think I might be lower than consensus in Dynasty on both of these guys. I've always been lower on Aiyuk, and I think it could be that I've missed on the talent evaluation. He's awesome. Mm-hmm. I just didn't think he was awesome enough to overcome the crowded 49ers room and the lack of pass volume in that offense. And really, except for 1 year in terms of actual fantasy production, that's been true. Now he's coming off of the major injury. We have lots of question marks about who is or is not going to be on this 49ers team. I don't have Brandon Aiyuk or Deebo Samuel currently in my top 36 dynasty wide receivers. Aiyuk 27 in its prime, Deebo 29, probably leaving his prime. I'm going to just go out on a limb and assume you're much more optimistic about Aiyuk than you are, Deebo.
Yeah, you said you don't have Aiyuk in your top 36
right
for Dynasty. That is, I think that's shocking to me. I haven't thought about rankings. I'm going to go see where he's at with KTC.
I'm going to guess he is 25.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I think I would have him in my top 24, but there's a lot of receivers to like, so that might be outside of the top 36 is interesting. Deebo, I'm pretty much all the way out on. The only reason I would not be is because at several points in his career, Deebo Samuel has looked like a true outlier from just a physical standpoint. So like, I think it's within reason that he could get himself back to that. Like, I don't want to doubt the guy because he's insane. But yeah, everything we saw this past year is really bad. Like, he often didn't look like himself, and then analytically it's just terrible. Like, I've got a stat that I made up using fantasy points data, and it is yards per target on target throws of 10 or more air yards. So on throws that were thrown down the field and were on target, how did receivers perform? And Deebo was dead last in this out of like 60 plus receivers, and that didn't surprise me at all to see that. That's, his game has always been more catch and run, of course, but like it feels so clear that he has declined. And so unless he changes something drastically, it seems like, no, I want to be out on that. Aiyuk does have some data points that are encouraging even from this past year. Of course, the year before that was insanely optimistic. But this past year, he ranked highest among any receiver with 200 or more routes in average separation score. This is, again, fantasy points data. And so I think there's still reason to believe that he is that good from a talent standpoint. But I can get behind what you're saying with the landing spot. If he's still in San Francisco, I would have him higher than you do. KTC has him at wide receiver 32 for reference.
Okay.
So you're not that far off. It makes sense. I think that people are dropping on him. The thing with Aiyuk is I do think you're playing with a pretty thin framework for fantasy success because of the type of role that he fills. I think Calvin Ridley maybe is a good corollary. Like, if it's not a good setup for Calvin Ridley because of the role that he's playing, it's going to be hard for him to turn in fantasy relevant numbers. Whereas like Terry McLaurin had always kind of been that guy. And then when you saw him used in a different way this past year, where he's getting more short looks and he has a quarterback who can deliver him consistently on target throws, he can be relevant. But other than that, McLaurin, even though he's extremely talented, had several years where he was a disappointment. And I think that's kind of where we could be with Aiyuk. Because he's winning down the field and being used as a true X receiver to free things up for the rest of the offense so often, it's not always going to lead to targets, especially if he's in a position where the team, doesn't have a lot of other options. So the defense is completely prioritizing him. So it would, I think this makes sense to be pretty nervous about Aiyuk.
The last name I have on the list, I've seen a lot of people just kind of cross him off of their potential free agent lists. T. Higgins, he's going to get the franchise tag. Mm-hmm. I'm not entirely sure that means the Bengals are going to keep him. It just means they're going to control where he goes, right? Like, it is still possible that they've said they want to make Jamar Chase the highest paid non-quarterback in the NFL, which rightfully so. They've got some other guys like Trey Hendrickson they need to figure out what they're going to do with. And so I still think it's possible that T. Higgins could be moved. We're hopeful that he stays in Cincinnati with Chase, with Burrow, as opposed to something like going and being the number one wide receiver for Drake May in New England, right?
I mean, I'm a huge Drake May stan, so I would love that. But yeah, for the overall like football environment, it's best if he's there. Cincinnati's passing offense is just so awesome when him and Jamar are both healthy and Joe Burrow's healthy. So Cincinnati's pass success rate when Higgins was on the field was only behind the Lions last year. Their EPA per pass play was only behind the Lions and the Ravens when Higgins was on the field. When he was off the field, it drops to like middle of the pack. And then if you look at like Jamar Chase's numbers, they were actually slightly better when Higgins was on the field in terms of yards and fantasy points per route run, which is pretty unusual just because typically when a wide receiver of Higgins' caliber comes off the field, the other guy sees a big increase in targets. But Higgins was winning so consistently, and it really unlocks things for Chase. Defenses can't only focus on him, and it elevates the whole offense. So the EPA stuff that I told you, like that, basically is just telling you, that T. Higgins scored 10 touchdowns in 12 games, and that helps the offense. But another way to look at it is through the fantasy points data lens, which does point towards him winning consistently and in a variety of ways, which was cool. They used him in a lot more types of ways than they have in the past when he's been typically just kind of a downfield dominant X receiver. So he was 4th in the NFL in win rate on slant routes. He was 6th in the NFL in win rate on hitch routes, that's his game normally. And then he had the highest win rate in the NFL on post routes. Those are all really cool, like wide receiver 1 kind of things, where I do think he could succeed in New England or somewhere like that if he were the wide receiver 1 somewhere else. But it just goes to show like how good he is. I do want people to appreciate how good he is as a player. He's not just a contested catch guy. Like he's been somebody, even dating back to Clemson, where he's been able to produce on a per route basis at a really, really elite level. He's kind of the archetype of guy that I was talking about with Aiyuk or Calvin Ridley, where they're winning down the field. And it's like, unless they're Mike Evans, it's really hard for them to be fantasy relevant. And Higgins has been that guy when he's been healthy. He really is like at the very top of that tier. He's really good.
Higgins is my wide receiver 15 in Dynasty. Will just be 26 years old at the start of the season. I'm mostly expecting he'll stay in Cincinnati. It might take a ding if he ends up getting traded somewhere else, but he's definitely a top 20 Dynasty wide receiver for me. Let's transition over to the free agents. So I've got 3 quarterbacks here that I think are almost impossible to rank for Dynasty purposes right now. They're guys that you could make a wager on and try to trade a 2nd-round pick in your super flex league, and maybe they sign a 2-year deal or a 3-year deal, and all of a sudden you've got a starting quarterback that always costs a first. There are also guys that, like, by the middle of next year, we may just be done with as starters. They are Sam Darnold, who finished last year as QB9 per game, but he put the big old gigantic asterisk next to it because he had a fantastic offense, Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. And then there's the 2 guys who shared the job in Pittsburgh last year, Justin Fields, who we all like more in fantasy than we do in real life, and Russell Wilson, who everybody seems to hate more than what his actual end of year fantasy points per game ends up being. He was a mid QB2 last year. He was a borderline QB1 the year before. Just at the very top, order of preference today for rostering one of these three quarterbacks, how would you rank them?
Definitely Darnold for me. I just checked KTC. They have Darnold at QB 25 in perceived consensus value right now, which when I saw that, I was like, I think I would be a little bit higher than that. But then the guys immediately behind him are Anthony Richardson and Jackson Dart, who I would rather have both of them. Justin Fields is next among these guys that we've looked at and we're talking about here. He's QB 28. Derek Carr, QB 33, Russell Wilson, QB 34. I think that's about right.
So I don't have the rookies in my rankings yet. You mentioned Jackson Dart, so I know the rookies are in those rankings, and I have Anthony Richardson quite a bit higher than that. Mm-hmm. But I've got Darnold at QB 22. I've got Fields at QB 25. I've got Wilson at QB 27. It seems to me that it's way more likely that Sam Darnold and Russell Wilson are going to start a majority of next season than Justin Fields. Do you think that's wrong?
I do think that is right. Like, that's my read on it too. Like, with Fields, I was trying to imagine what would be best for him. And I think it would be staying in Pittsburgh or maybe like going to Indianapolis. And if the Richardson thing doesn't work out there, then they plug him in.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. I was kind of surprised to see him this high in KTC's rankings. I guess it's just because he does bring the rushing upside, you know what I mean? So there's such a disconnect between like real life and fantasy there. But yeah, it does feel like the NFL mostly does not view him as a starting QB at this point.
Right. And so I think the way I don't put together separate lists of rankings for one QB in Superflex leagues, even though I know, well, everybody that's starting a new league right now seems to be starting a Superflex league. I think there are still actually more one QB leagues out there than there are Superflex. And so I just try to kind of blend them. In a one quarterback league, I think Fields would be my favorite because floor doesn't really matter.
Sure.
In a super flex league, Fields is definitely third and probably a distant third, because I think it's much more likely that either Darnold or Wilson can be a QB2. I have pretty serious concerns. Like, I feel like we know what Russell Wilson is now. He's a QB2. And any coach that brings Russell Wilson knows what, if the Steelers bring him back, they know what he is. They know how to use him. That's what he's going to be. Sam Darnold is like the same wild card amount of Fields, except without quite the same upside due to the rushing. I don't have a great deal of confidence that if Darnold goes really anywhere else, he's going to be any good at all next year.
What if he went to the Rams? I don't feel like anybody talks about that because Aaron Rodgers is like the Rams guy right now, but I feel like it could make sense to keep him like in the Shanahan tree, going from Shanahan to KOC and then to McVay. I think that would be a good fit for him. Like, I just haven't heard anything about it really.
I've heard absolutely nothing about it. And I think I would definitely feel more confident in Darnold not being terrible if he went to McVay. I'm afraid he's going to go get the most money with the dumbest team, and things are going to just completely fall apart. We did have a question from the chat. He's not a free agent. We talked about the 49ers wide receivers. Mike says, I'm curious if a long-term deal for Brock Purdy will bump him up in the rankings at all, or if that's already baked into his price a little. And Mike, I want to tell you, you are asking the wrong guy. I am already the high guy on Brock Purdy in Dynasty. I think he is probably my favorite quarterback buy at cost. Jacob's going to tell me if I'm right or not. I'm assuming you're going to tell me that he's somewhere around QB 16 or 17 in the rankings you're looking at.
They have him at QB 14, and the only guy that I would definitely take him ahead of is Kyler Murray. Would you rather have him than Jordan Love or Bo Nix or Caleb Williams or CJ Stroud?
I have him ahead of Love. I have him ahead of Nix. I have him ahead of Stroud. I have Caleb ahead of Purdy.
Wow. Okay.
But again, that could change depending on who the 49ers deal. And I think the point does stand. The fact that he's not, the extension does give him a little more safety. There's always going to be more doubts. Maybe not always. Maybe after he gets the contract, we stop having these doubts because of his draft pedigree. But I mostly think that, like, last year was a bit of a down year compared to the years before. But still, if you look at just Brock Purdy's passing efficiency last year, it's still absolutely insane. His 8.5 yards per attempt last year. He's now thrown 1,069 passes in the NFL, and he's averaged 8.9 yards per pass attempt. That, sure, it's not all Brock Purdy. Some of it's Kyle Shanahan. He's getting ready to sign a long-term deal to stay with Kyle Shanahan. I think you can expect he's going to be amongst the league leaders in that statistic, which means that he can throw 450, 500 passes and throw for the same number of yards as someone who throws 500, 525. And then the other thing is he has a career 6% passing touchdown rating. Like, that's, again, just insane. That's Patrick Mahomes territory. And so if he's going to be that efficient on the lower volume, I mostly just expect that that's going to continue, and he's going to be one of the surefire low-end QB1s year in and year out, still just 25 years old. So, again, if you want to trust my rankings, just go buy Brock Purdy right now, because I do think he is one of the cheaper QB1s available. We have some free agent running backs, and I'm honestly afraid for anyone who is a free agent running back right now, because this draft class is insanely loaded. I think there are two guys who are going to be top 10 running backs in my Dynasty running back rankings immediately. There's another 4 guys who might be in my top 24, and I would not be signing a veteran free agent running back if I had any 3rd and 4th round draft picks this year. But those 3 guys are J.K. Dobbins, who I love, Aaron Jones, who looked really good again last year, but is too old. And then maybe one of the most hated guys in fantasy football, Najee Harris. Although I anticipate that NFL coaches and general managers like Najee a lot more than fantasy football managers do.
Yeah, I'll be really curious to see what happens with Najee, like how real life NFL people view him. Last year was bizarre. He avoided way more tackles than he had previously. And I felt like he kind of changed his running style. It seemed like he lost some weight and was trying to make more explosive plays. But with that, he posted the lowest rushing success rate by far of his career, 32%. For comparison, Jaylen Warren in the same backfield was at 43%. And I do think that matters most of the time to NFL
Right.
people. It's hard to ever like feel like there's anything among these running back stats that really matters that much in terms of signal and how we can expect NFL decision makers to follow it. But I do think success rate is one that I've noticed that is like running backs who, turn out first downs and positive plays generally get rewarded. And then we see guys who are like Najee who are doing too much kind of fade into obscurity. And so it wouldn't surprise me if that's what happens with him. Either way, yeah, I'm not feeling overly optimistic. I don't know. I guess if he lands in just the perfect spot, then he'll still be fantasy relevant.
I think Najee before last year seems to fit really well into that Jamal Williams role in the Ben Johnson offense. Like, let DeAndre Swift be DeAndre Swift and let Najee Harris score 15 touchdowns. But you're right. If he's going to focus more on dancing and less on picking up the 3.5 yards every single time, then he doesn't fit quite as well in that mold. I assume that what you saw from Aaron Jones last year, like, he still looked like he's really good. It's just hard. Like, it's really hard. Maybe you send a 2nd-round pick for him and hope that he gets a good landing spot.
Yeah, man. Sorry. I'm stuck on adding Najee Harris to what we just saw from Chicago last year. That was one of the grossest offenses I've watched in so long. It's like, what would make it better? Add Najee Harris. Ben Johnson's truly got to be a wizard to make this work. Aaron Jones, yeah, he was awesome last year. He kind of wore down as the season wore on, but lots of explosive plays, a lot of really good rushing and receiving metrics. I love the guy. And I think he can be efficient even as part of a committee, which is probably what's going to happen here. I would have to think. I don't think anybody's signing up for bell cow and Jones experience at this point. But I think he could still be fantasy relevant. And then if, the guy he's with goes down, then he might end up being, for a month, like a top 10 type of running back. If he's in the right spot. So I think he's somebody you can buy for fantasy super, super cheap. But he's past 30. He's dead for Dynasty, right? We know where we're at here.
J.K. Dobbins is actually my highest ranked free agent rookie running back, but again, kind of feels like a Justin Fields situation where, man, J.K. Dobbins, if he could just play 15 games, I think could be awesome in the right situation, but J.K. Dobbins also may not ever be a starting fantasy running back again.
Yeah, Dobbins is interesting. He looked so good at the beginning of the year. But then as I look at his numbers overall from last year, there are definitely some red flags. Like the percentage of his runs that went for positive yardage was the 3rd lowest among 31 qualifiers. But a lot of that can be contextualized by kind of looking at what was happening with that run game with the offensive line. It just wasn't working very well. Overall, I'm pretty excited. He's a lot younger than people realize. And he showed really encouraging juice for like his first year back from the injury. So I'm tentatively in on buying him, but I think I'm just waiting and seeing with all these running backs.
Right. I mean, you're probably throwing away a late second at the most, and then you don't really care if you did, although there may be a running back taken in the late second of this draft that turns into a top 15 running back in the NFL. Moving to the wide receivers. There's a couple of older guys who were still pretty awesome last year, Davante Adams and Keenan Allen. I made the reference to Adams just following Rodgers wherever. I can't think of a wide receiver that I wouldn't feel worse about if Adams and Rodgers end up in that spot. But do you think that it looks like Adams still has a lot of juice left, or is it just he still has Aaron Rodgers' attention?
I think it's a little bit of both. Yeah, he had pretty solid numbers with the Jets, 2.3 yards per run with the Jets, which is good. Solid separation score with the Jets, would have ranked in the same vicinity as like Garrett Wilson, Tyreek Hill, Calvin Ridley over the course of the full season. So that was good to see because his early season underlying metrics with the Raiders were absolutely horrible. And I was wondering if maybe he was just washed, but I think it was maybe just the dysfunction of what was going on there. So there's probably still some tread on his tires. And if he ends up in the right spot, then I don't think it was just Rodgers. I mean, we've seen this guy be historically good. So I think it's totally fair to believe that his age window could extend beyond what we see most of the time at wide receiver.
Do you strongly prefer Adams over Keenan Allen?
I do, yeah.
Okay. That's Chris Godwin is not as old as those guys, but coming off of a second major leg injury in the last 4 years. We saw a couple of years ago, that first year back, really almost the first 3/4 of the year was really negatively impacted by the injury, it seemed, in terms of actual production. And I just wonder, like, again, Godwin kind of like Aiyuk in that nobody's going to debate how awesome Chris Godwin is, but he's 29 years old. We don't know how good he's going to be the first half of this year coming off of that injury. Is he basically in the Aiyuk range in terms of dynasty rankings for you?
Comparing those two is breaking my brain because they're like complete opposites. His game is really fantasy friendly, Chris Godwin.
Right.
So like his per route data was elite last year. His production was elite. But I do think so much of that was him benefiting from Liam Cohen's design and him being exactly the player to be plugged into this design. He's really, really good. But like what he was really good at was catching the ball and breaking tackles. Which, can be replicated, but if you do lose a little bit of juice with the injuries and age and stuff like that, then it's like, oh, what do we really have here? Is it Deebo Samuel 2024 season? Like what is this? Over 1/4 of his yards last year came on screens, which was the highest rate in the NFL by a pretty wide margin. If you remove screens, his yard per target rate was not good. It was like the same as Demario Douglas. And I think with Cohen leaving, I am wary of investing in Chris Godwin. I love the guy as a player, but I do worry a little bit about where we're at this point in his career. It's been a while. It's basically since his early career that he's shown us like a consistent ability to win down the field versus man coverage. Right. And so if he's reliant on the offense, like kind of using him in this gimmicky way, we'll see. Tampa Bay's offense could be good and he could just be healthy and be the same guy, or at least 95% of it and still be really good for fantasy. But I'm fine missing out on that, honestly.
Jalen McMillan was a guy that a lot of people were really excited about when they thought Godwin might leave.
Mm-hmm.
And now that they haven't agreed to anything yet. The Bucs and Godwin just agreed to push back a deadline so they could try to work out a deal. I'm assuming if they do sign a deal, that McMillan's dynasty value is going to take a significant hit. Would you be willing to give up a late second for McMillan? Did you see enough from him last year to do that?
I don't think I love that. No, I think just because this draft is so intriguing. I guess if it's a future second, then sure. I was pretty impressed with what we saw in the second half of McMillan's season last year. I think he really improved as the year went on. He looked kind of lost early on. But I liked him as a prospect. I loved what we saw during the preseason, and he showed a lot of encouraging signs. And he benefited from Godwin being out because the offense shifted in a different direction and passed down the field more often. But he wasn't necessarily like winning in the Godwin role. So I think it's possible that all three of them could coexist if Godwin and Evans start to take a slight step back. And he wouldn't necessarily. It's not like he got plugged into the Godwin role and he started putting up a bunch of catch and run stuff.
No, I think it was more Sterling Shepard in the Godwin role, and he was just getting more targets. A couple of guys left. Marquise Brown may not get to free agency because it sounds like the Chiefs want to bring him back, although I'm not sure that does anything for us at all in terms of dynasty value. Yeah. Amari Cooper just had one of the worst seasons a wide receiver could have. It was partially Deshaun Watson's fault. It was partially that he had a wrist injury fault, but regardless of what the circumstances were, it was absolutely atrocious. Do you have any hope for Marquise Brown or Amari Cooper?
I didn't see much from Hollywood that was exciting, really.
Yeah.
The Chiefs early on seemed like they wanted to get him going in some creative ways. And so if they are intent on bringing him back, that's intriguing, but it would be wait and see for me because so far it's been a while since we've seen anything from him that is, encouraging. Amari Cooper really had a strong 2023, better than people realize, I think, because it was masked by just the dysfunction of the offense that year. And that had me pretty bullish on him and his ability to be good later into his career. And then this past year was terrible, like you alluded to, but he did show up strong in that metric that I mentioned earlier, yards per target on target throws. There just were very few of those. Even when he moved to the Bills, I don't know if it was just bad luck on a small sample size with Josh Allen throwing deep to him, or what it was, just those two not being on the same page because it was a mid-season acquisition. But he didn't get a lot of on-target throws down the field. But when he did, he was productive with them. I think there's a chance. If I were to bet on one of them, it would definitely be Amari.
Okay. And the problem with Amari, of course, is that he's going to be 31 next year.
Yeah.
And so you are betting on a bounce back from an older player. But honestly, he might be somebody that when we get closer to rookie drafts gets cut. Yeah. Like somebody needs to make room to make their I wouldn't cut him for a third round rookie pick, but I mean, in a shallower league, you need to make room for that late second, 23 or 24. You're a true contender. Like that might be a guy that ends up on the waiver wire. And in that case, I'd probably try to pick him up. But it was dreadfully bad. Let's take our second break. And when we come back, I will unveil my pre-combine. Now the combine started. Rookie top 6. Okay, so we are back. And I the way I framed the article over at CBS was that there is a sure thing in my top 12, and there is a wild card in my top 12. The sure thing is that Ashton Jeanty is going to be the 101, regardless of what happens this weekend. He's not even testing. Regardless, almost certainly, of what happens in the NFL draft. And I know people can say, how can you say that? Draft capital matters so much. And I'll just say, like, this is flashbacks of the Jonathan Taylor situation for me. We all thought Jonathan Taylor had the potential to be a generational running back. Nobody thought Clyde Edwards was a top 3 back in the class. And then the Chiefs took Clyde Edwards-Helaire in round 1, and he went ahead of Jonathan Taylor in rookie drafts. And dynasty teams are still suffering from that. So no, even if some team does something crazy, I expect Jeanty's going to be a top 20 pick in the rookie draft. He's coming off one of the greatest seasons in college football history. He's 21 years old. Draft him at 101. Yes, even ahead of the quarterbacks. That says a little bit about the quarterbacks. The wild card, and it's a guy I'll talk about that didn't make the top 6, not yet, is Travis Hunter. If you told me that he was going to play wide receiver full-time and just a little bit of corner, then he might be my number 2 wide receiver. He'd definitely be in my top 5. He said at the combine that he really wants to play both. I don't know, Jacob. I don't think most NFL teams are like fun that much. They like to ruin fun, and they're going to say, no, it's too difficult. No, you have to be in this meeting and this meeting. I'm just really afraid he's not going to get to play enough wide receiver to be as good as he should be in fantasy football.
Yeah, I mean, getting a true like lockdown top 5 impact cornerback is so hard to do and so valuable. Whereas like you can hit on a receiver late, Nico Collins or whatever, like you don't necessarily have to get that guy early. And so I do think it's possible that a team is like, if he plays receiver, he's just going to play a bit,
Right.
Like it would be pretty unprecedented for him to do both at a bunch. And I do think cornerback makes sense to be the priority. But man, you watch the film on this guy as a receiver, and it's like he
can be the best.
Yes, he looks different. He looks like that type of a mover, like different, like Neighbors, Jefferson kind of Jamar Chase kind of guys. He just moves right past people. He's really, really intriguing. It's going to be so fun to see what happens with his career.
Well, and I think the other thing is, like, Azer made the point yesterday and then quickly argued with himself. He was talking about how much more valuable corner is than wide receiver. And we said, well, then why are there like 10 wide receivers paid more than the highest paid corner in the NFL right now? Like the NFL certainly acts like they value high-end wide receivers more than high-end corners.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I think part of it is I don't know if there's that many cornerbacks that are at that level right now. I feel like the position is sort of fallen off. And maybe
I think partially, and also how many cornerback jerseys do you see out on the streets?
Right. That's what I'm saying. Like, I don't know if it's just my bias from growing up with all these really cool cornerbacks, but I feel like that has taken a step back. I don't know.
So my 102 is Cam Ward. I'm assuming he's going to be the first pick in the NFL draft. He'll probably go to the Giants. Hopefully he and Malik Neighbors fit like perfectly and everything is awesome. I said he'll probably go to the Giants. This is assuming the Giants are going to trade up for the 101. Maybe they won't. But regardless, Cam Ward is my 102. 103 is Tet McMillan, the best wide receiver in this draft out of Arizona. 104, Travion Henderson out of Ohio State. Really amongst the running backs, I think there's almost two tiers in the first three running backs. I like Jeanty, obviously, a lot more than anybody else. And I like Henderson as a clear 102 in this class. This one could be subject to the NFL sending us a different signal if for some reason he falls behind 3 or 4 other running backs. Maybe I'm wrong, but man, what his potential in the passing game in the open field could be a league winner as a rookie. At 105, I've got Shedeur Sanders. Let's see where he goes. I know there's been some talk about him falling, but as a rule, we generally get the top 2 quarterbacks in the first 5 picks. And so I think Sanders is going to get a chance for a couple of years to be a starter. And in Superflex, you pretty much have to take that. And at 106, this is where it could be just about anybody, but I think Luther Burden, from what I've seen, don't get so caught up in the way that Missouri used him last year, because they had some real deficiencies at the quarterback position in terms of they had to kind of gadget some things up for Burden. I think his potential upside is just about as high as anybody's in this class. I've heard some people make the argument for him as the number 1 wide receiver in my class. So my top 6 are Jeanty, Ward, McMillan, Henderson, Sanders, and Burden. I told you I wasn't going to make you talk too much rookies here, Gibbs, but if you have any thoughts, I'll take them.
I love the Burden take. I'm excited. He's one of the guys I haven't got through my wide receiver film yet. And so I'm kind of saving that for last because it's my favorite. And I'm really excited to get to him. And I'm intrigued by you saying that he can do more than just slot stuff. That is what I was hoping for. His data looks really good. So that's exciting. McMillan seems really, really exciting. Love to see him as the clear 1 for you. And I'm curious what the rest of the top 12 looks like. So I'll have to go check that out.
I think the interesting thing is last year we couldn't hardly get a running back into our top 12. This year, if things fall right, half of the first round of rookie drafts might be running backs. And some of that, I think, is the psychology of people dealing with what happened last year. And some of that is the fact that this is a really fantastic running back class.
Yeah. I heard Danny Kelly compare Henderson to like a discount version of Jahmyr Gibbs.
Yep.
And it's like, yeah, I kind of see that. That's fun. Yeah.
I thought that name crossed my mind as I was talking, but I hate
just don't want to say it. Yeah.
I hate, like you could also say that Ashton Jeanty is the best running back prospect since Saquon Barkley. But why do we need to do this to these kids? Let's let them play a little bit of football before we start making those types of comparisons. Gibbs, it was great to have you back. It's always awesome to talk to you. Thank you for being here today.
Good to be back, man. This was fun.
Thank you to Thomas. Thank you to everybody who was active in the chat. We will talk to you next Tuesday.